During World War II, two carrier groups met in the Coral Sea, and this was the first battle that was entirely fought with naval air power. The incident was fought by American and Japanese carriers, and it was this battle that proved the worth of the carrier. Today, the most powerful naval force is the carrier group, and only a few countries in the world have such battle fleets. Although the vessels themselves have great firepower, it is the air power that the actual carrier supplies that make the carrier group an ideal offensive and standoff asset. In this episode of Sea Power, we're going to investigate some of the most successful naval aircraft. The dawning of the jet age and the steam-powered catapult saw many new ventures onto the carrier deck. Some of the most notable were the Crusader from Vought, the A4D Skyhawk by Douglas, and the Corsair II, also from Vought, in the attack role. The Corsairs in particular went into service with the Marines as well and became celebrated in the air of Vietnam. Meanwhile, the Navy's jet fighter development came to the force with McDonnell's F-4 Phantom. The plane, which was first delivered in 1958, saw many appearances in various conflicts. Remarkably, the last F-4 rolled out of the factory in 1979. Today, it is being considered for new roles after maintenance and upgrading by the European Aeronautic Defence and Space Company. The plane is still providing service, though little of the original 50-year-old design remains unchanged. Regardless of the initial engine problems, the Tomcat was revolutionary and the pinnacle of what had been learnt from the early beginnings of building carrier-based aircraft. The difficulty with the advancement of carrier-based planes was that every step forward in aviation required changes to the actual carrier. With the development of the jet engine rose substantial problems. Jet aircraft were getting heavier and heavier with every new model. They also got much faster. This meant that their landing and takeoff speeds were higher and they required longer runways. Major changes to the aircraft carrier's shape and the procedures of pilots and ground crew were required for the jet age. With their weight exceeding 10,000 pounds and their high landing speeds, crash barriers were not always sufficient to prevent accidents such as this. In the late 1940s, there was a huge increase in accidents involving planes slamming into parked aircraft. To overcome this, the angled deck was employed. The angled deck runway permitted pilots who missed the trap wires to accelerate and go round again. This improvement also freed up the deck space to allow more planes to be flight ready or prepared. The steam catapult was another addition that assisted the plane to achieve takeoff speed over a very short distance. An F-14 requires about 1 mile of runway to lift off. On a carrier, this 30-ton plane is catapulted to 170 miles per hour in 3 seconds over a distance of 300 feet. Although these carrier features were employed before the Tomcat's arrival, it is interesting to note that the Tomcat was built to excel all other aircraft, and it had to be created within the limitations of that day's carriers. The plane, first delivered in 1972, became the mainstay of the carrier strike force. with its variable wing geometry and diverse payload capabilities, was Top Gun for an extensive period. However, the Tomcat is now in its final years of Navy service, being pressed into the reconnaissance and Bombcat strike roles. During this period, the attack role was taken up by the FA-18 Hornet from Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. The Tomcat's replacement will probably be the new F-18F Super Hornet, a longer twin-seat version of the existing Hornets. The FA-18 Hornet had originally been ordered as a dual-role fighter and attack aircraft, intended to replace the Vought A-7 Corsair II, the A-6 Intruder and the McDonnell F-4 Phantom in Navy service, and to augment the significantly more costly Grumman F-14 Tomcat. The first operational cruise by Navy Hornet squadrons took place in February to August 1985, deploying aboard the USS Constellation. Today, the Hornet and the aging F-14s are the current fighter and attack aircraft on most US carriers. This is the Tomcat's second test flight. Test pilot Miller is in the rear seat and Smythe is the pilot. The first test flight was a simple see if it flies affair, and it was really only a takeoff, short straight flight and landing. It was uneventful. The second flight was more performance and handling based. Unlike the first test flight, this one was eventful. The chase pilot noticed smoke coming from the rear of the Tomcat. A closer inspection revealed that it was hydraulic fluid. Within a few minutes, the plane started losing functions. It was basically bleeding to death. At about 100 feet above the ground and not far from the runway, the pilots were forced to eject and the plane, Prototype 1, was lost. And from the ground, it looked like this. It wasn't until June of 1972 that the first carrier tests were performed. After a series of touch and goes, a landing was completed by aircraft number 10. Another problem arose. Number 10 suffered a hydraulic leak with the nose landing gear. This was not what Grumman needed, as the Navy and Congress were still not entirely happy with the Tomcat, and this film and the result of the carrier test was to be flown to the Navy for its final decision regarding the purchase of the plane. A hydraulic leak was definitely the last thing Grumman needed. As it turned out, Congress endorsed the plane that became an aviation legend. If Congress were to have made their decision on the following day, it may have all been a different story, as plane number 10 and its pilot Miller were both lost. The program continued, and in the latter half of 1972 production began, and the F-14 entered service in 1973. The Tomcat has undergone many revamps since. It's been 40 years since the fabulous Phantom first took to the air on May 27, 1958. The F-4 Phantom II aircraft, which still flies in defence of 8 nations, was retired in 1996 from US military forces, ending a record-studded 38-year career. The aircraft flew every traditional military mission: air superiority, close air support, interception, air defence suppression, long-range strike, fleet defence, attack and reconnaissance.
Heading 230, indicating 1.16 out.
It could fly short training missions or 4 to 5 hour sorties as a wild weasel in search of anti-aircraft defence systems. It starred in both the Vietnam War and Operation Desert Storm, with a record of 280 air-to-air victories and the destruction of more than 200 anti-aircraft sites. It has been flown by the defence forces of 11 other nations: Australia, Egypt, Germany, Great Britain, Greece, Iran, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Spain and Turkey. From 1958 to 1979, when the production line stopped, a total of 5,195 F-4 Phantom II aircraft were built. Of those, 5,057 rolled off the McDonnell aircraft production line in St. Louis, Missouri. The 21-year production run was the longest on record until surpassed by the F-15 Eagle, which has now been in production 26 years. The two-place twin-engine supersonic F-4 Phantom II flew at Mach 2 and could carry a payload of up to 16,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, missiles and guns. Each aircraft has 54,197 feet of wiring and 643,000 fasteners holding it together. More than 800 F-4 Phantom II aircraft are still on active duty with the defence forces of 8 nations: Egypt, Germany, Greece, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Spain and Turkey. Almost 100 Phantoms that have been converted into QF-4 drones and missile targets still serve the US Navy and Air Force. Israel, Japan and Germany have upgraded their Phantoms with new avionics and capabilities. Greece awarded an avionics upgrade contract to Daimler-Benz of Germany in 1997. Given the upgrades already performed and those under contract, the F-4 Phantom II will probably still be flying in 2015, nearly 60 years after its first flight. A common denominator of the past naval aircraft, and perhaps even tomorrow's naval assault aircraft, is the Vulcan cannon. The M61 20mm Vulcan is an externally powered 6-barrel rotary firing gun, having a rate of fire of up to 7,200 SPM. The 6 rotating barrels contribute to long weapon life by minimising barrel erosion and heat generation. The gun's rate of fire, essentially 100 rounds per second, gives the pilot a shot density that will enable a kill when fired in 1-second bursts. The M61 20mm cannon is a proven gun, having been the US military's close-in weapon of choice dating back to the 1950s. In December 1957, the Grumman Corporation was selected by the US Navy to fulfill the new long-range, low-level tactical strike aircraft requirement with their A-6 Intruder. The first of 482 production aircraft were delivered in February 1963. The A-6 became the USN's principal medium attack aircraft from the mid-1960s through the 1990s. It served in combat in Vietnam and in later engagements in Lebanon and Libya. The Intruder saw further duty in the 1991 Gulf War, but it was phased out of service quickly. The last Intruders were retired on the 19th of December 1996. The A-6E was an all-weather 2-seat subsonic carrier-based attack aircraft. It was equipped with a micro-miniaturized digital computer, a solid-state weapons release system and a single integrated track and search radar. The Target Recognition Attack Multi-Sensor (TRAM) version of the A6E was introduced to the fleet in 1979. It was equipped with a chin turret containing a forward-looking infrared system and a laser designator and receiver. The A6E proved once again that it was the best all-weather precision bomber in the world in the joint strike on Libyan terrorist-related targets in 1986. Evading over 100 guided missiles, the strike force flew at low levels in complete darkness and accurately delivered laser-guided and other ordnance on target. The original A7s were powered by the Pratt & Whitney TF30 turbofan. They were equipped with multi-mode radar, and the airplane armament was one 20mm M61 multi-barrel cannon, plus up to 15,000 pounds of mixed stores carried externally on 6 underwing stores pylons. The TF30 engine would give the plane a top speed of 570 mph at sea level. Specifically in line with the Navy requirements for ease of maintenance, this engine had only 42 steps in the installation procedure, and this could be achieved by a well-trained crew in under 15 minutes. All of this was precisely fitted into a specifically built airframe for the Navy's light attack role. The A7 first flew on September 27, 1965, 4 weeks ahead of schedule, and was adopted by the Air Force and Navy. Vought was once again making Navy planes at full speed. A7 production eventually totaled more than 1,500, including exports, when completed in 1982. The initial carrier trials showed some limitations. During the catapult launch, the steam from the catapult could be sucked into the engine intake, reducing the thrust provided by the TF30 engine. To overcome this, limitations were placed on takeoff weights of the A9As until the power plants were upgraded. In spite of the engine limitations, the Corsair was needed for the Vietnam conflict. Later, the same squadron, VA-147, also were called to the waters of North Korea. This squadron would fly their Corsairs for almost 20 years, and they were only replaced by F-18 Hornets in 1985. These were, for the time, the best light attack aircraft ever produced. On takeoff and landing, the XF-8U's wing could be pivoted up 7 degrees, hinging on the rear wing spar and jacked up by a hydraulic actuator. The variable incident scheme allowed the wing to assume a high angle of attack, reducing the approach and takeoff speed while keeping the fuselage level and providing the pilot with good visibility. In addition, the raised wing's centre section acted like an air brake, reducing landing speed further. The airframe's concept was designed with the new area ruling scheme, in which transonic performance was improved by making sure all cross-sections of the airframe changed as gradually as possible. This provided minimum drag at above the speed of sound. Many of the concepts proven on this aircraft are still standard on today's fighter planes. Today, the Crusader has a reputation that is hard to beat. It had outstanding manoeuvrability, excellent performance, and a very powerful attack. The armament section contained 4 20mm cannon with 144 rounds per gun. Behind the guns on each side of the aircraft was a launch rail for a single Sidewinder anti-aircraft missile. The aircraft was also fitted with a retractable rocket pack in the belly that stored 32 70mm unguided folding fin rockets. Later versions were strongly enhanced for the strike role through target illumination radar and the addition of 2 removable underwing stores pylons for jettisonable Zuni rocket packs, or up to 5,000 pounds of unguided weapons. Though nearly half the fuselage was occupied by the large Pratt & Whitney J57 engine, the airframe's design would allow for long unrefueled flights. Another innovation was the RAT, Ram Air Turbine, that could be extended from the right side of the fuselage directly behind the cannon for emergency electrical and hydraulic power. The RAT would prove very useful in practice, allowing many pilots to bring home aircraft that would have otherwise been lost. The basic airframe would appear in 18 production versions and hold many world records. Variants included reconnaissance, photographic, night fighter and twin-seat trainer versions. Future astronaut John Glenn broke the transcontinental speed record for the 2,445-mile trip between New York and Los Angeles in a Crusader on July 16, 1957. Over their lifetime, 1,263 Crusaders were built. As a mark of their abilities, their redesigns ran for over 10 years, while most of their contemporaries were simply junked at the end of their service lives as obsolete. In the 1960s, several hundred F-8Us were remanufactured to extend their service life. Up until 1986, US Reserve units used them, and a small number were built for the French Navy. The final flights of these French Crusaders occurred at the aircraft's retirement ceremonies in Brest, France in December of 1999.